Hi there. Some of you are, you're probably expecting to see me at White Sands, but some of you know there's a fellow who goes on Sundays to help with my live streaming, and he's not going to be there this Sunday. So I was trying to decide what to do about that. I could have probably found someone to check out with it, but I decided that it would be probably easiest and best and most effective if I just pre-recorded my Dharma talk. This will be roughly what I'll be talking about at White Sands, and just go ahead and do it now, and then you can watch it Sunday morning if you want to. So some of you are probably familiar with the TED Talks, those talks that were given at conferences on technology, entertainment, and design. And there are a lot of them on Netflix and YouTube. And I watched one not long ago by Billy Graham. For those of you who don't know, Graham was a very prominent religious leader. He was an ordained Baptist minister, passed away, I think, in 2018. This might surprise you with me being a Buddhist and all that stuff, but Graham was kind of an influence on me. He was an amazing speaker, and I was very inspired by the way he connected with people. And he advised a lot of presidents, and he co-preached with Dr. Martin Luther King, was very much instrumental in the civil rights movement in the 1950s, and so on. So I suspect that listening to Billy Graham when I was growing up affected some of the choices that led to me being here now talking to you. So this particular talk, the TED Talk, centered around King David, who was a biblical figure, for those of you who don't know, who united the tribes of Israel under one ruler. And in his talk, Graham pointed out that much of David's life was motivated by his recognition of three problems and his desire to find solutions to these problems: the problem of human evil, the problem of human suffering, and the problem of death. Well, David realized that even with all his wealth and power, he was subject to evil, suffering, and death. And this might remind you of someone, the young prince from northern India, Siddhartha Gautama, who recognized a similar conundrum. He was raised in luxury and power, but he realized that he and his loved ones were subject to such things. So we could see evil, suffering, and death as medical problems, scientific problems, even legal problems. But as Graham pointed out, David recognized these as spiritual problems, and so he sought spiritual solutions for them, turning to his faith for answers. And likewise, we're told that amid Siddhartha's angst over his realization of sickness, old age, and death, he saw a holy man who had transcended suffering, or seemed to have, and realized at that moment that suffering must be a spiritual problem, and he determined to seek a spiritual solution. So, I'll often ask people why they started coming to services and things like that. And no one has ever told me, well, I was thinking things are going really great, so I'll take up Buddhism. The beginning of the spiritual journey always starts from a place of suffering and wanting freedom from it. There's a term used by people who study theology and so on, soteriology. Basically, it's the study of the theory of salvation, specifically how salvation appears in various religious contexts. So if you're studying soteriology, you're looking at a religion and its theory of how and from what you are saved. So Graham described David's search for salvation from evil, death, and suffering. And that's a fairly universal description of what humans want to come to terms with, what we're seeking to be saved from when we're seeking spiritual answers. So I touched on this a little bit Wednesday night when I was talking on YouTube about science and Buddhism. And that talk is still there. You can check it out later on if you want to. But I mentioned at the time that I was going to be talking about things like the benefits of Buddhist practice from a fairly humanistic point of view, because I was considering the Buddhist teachings relative to modern science. But that's not all there is to Buddhism. The question comes up now and then, is Buddhism a religion? And different people answer that in different ways. And a lot of people think it's not, because it's not necessarily theistic. But that's a very narrow view. A lot of religions are not necessarily theistic. And Buddhism doesn't just deal with mental wellness and stress, although a lot of people come to it for that reason. It offers a broader, more spiritual approach to evil, suffering, and death, what David was looking for. And so I would say that based on that, Buddhism is a religion. And this is where soteriology comes in, why I use that term. We all want salvation from suffering, even as Buddhists, but we use a different language. We call it refuge. And that refuge comes in different forms. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit today, but I decided that this is going to end up being a series because I can't cover this whole topic in the space of what I'm given as a Dharma talk at White Sands. So it would be helpful, I think, though, for starters, to talk about what Buddhists believe about death and the afterlife, because that's one of the things that religion looks at. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as saying, here's what Buddhists believe. Even the Buddha himself gave different answers to such questions, depending on who was asking and why they were asking. And sometimes he refused to answer the question altogether. So there's an answer, but to get to it requires us to ask another question, which is, what is the self? What is it that dies? So what do we think? What we think of as a self is an aggregate of physical form, along with formless things that make up mind and mental processes. So there's a body, and then there are sensations. There are perceptions that come in through the sense doors. There are ideas, memories, and various thoughts. And there's consciousness, awareness of these things. So when the Buddha was alive, one prevailing view compared the self to a caterpillar that crawled from one blade of grass to another. All this mind stuff was seen as the soul, and it just moved from form to form. And so there were people who taught that there was a discrete self, an Atman, that contained aspects of personality and existence. And it just moved from one container to another. But the Buddha looked at these different parts of the self, form, sensation, perception, mental processes, and consciousness, and said none of these things were actually a self. And without them all working in concert and dependent on one another, you couldn't find a self. So in a way, you can compare the self to a candle flame. The flame is dependent on the things that make up the candle, like wick and candle wax, which acts as fuel for the flame. And then there's the heat. And once the candle, the wax and the wicks that fuels and is a conduit for the flame is used up, then the flame goes out. The flame can't stand on its own. If you remove the heat, remove the wick, remove the fuel, you don't have anything. None of those things contains the essence of flame, just like there's no part of me that contains me. So suppose we let that candle burn almost to the end, and then just as the flame is about to sputter and go out, we light another candle from it. The flame doesn't jump off of one candle onto another, and you could light 1,000 candles from one flame without the flame being diminished. So what happens instead is that the heat from one flame becomes part of the causes and conditions for the next one. And that flame is going to burn until that candle is all used up. As long as there's fuel, one flame or its heat, which is the product of a lot of the activity that happens as the fuel is consumed, can become a condition for the next flame. So this is a metaphor for the self. This physical form came into being because of causes and conditions. And once those causes and conditions are used up, so to speak, this form comes to an end. But just like the heat of a candle flame can become a cause for another flame, the residues of my actions, the things that I've been doing with this fuel and this heat, will become a cause for another life. So there's a very complicated explanation for how that works, called the dependent origination, and I'm not going to go into that today. But at its basis, it has to do with the law of karma. So the law of karma is this: if you do a good thing, you get a good result. You do a bad thing, you get a bad result. It's pretty simple cause and effect. Strictly speaking, it's not a fact. You can't see it empirically. But if you put it to the test, you get enough evidence from it that you can start taking its working on faith. So when I was going through the, the Bright Dawn program, one of my fellow students commented to Reverend Koyo Kabose, who's the head of the program. He was having trouble believing in karma. And Reverend Koyo said he understood that. And then he compared karma to gravity, which I think is a good analogy. You can say that the law of karma is to spirituality, kind of like the law of gravity is to science. Neither karma nor gravity are facts. They can't be seen through some empirical means. You can't show you gravity any more than I can show you karma. But they can be tested and will prove to be pretty good predictors of what will happen. And so karma is pretty much a spiritual theory, the way gravity is a scientific theory. Theory in the sense of this is how things work and you can test it and it predicts what's going to happen. So Kabose said to my fellow student, you don't have to believe in karma. Doesn't make any difference whether you believe in karma, but you don't have to believe in gravity either. But it wouldn't be very wise to ignore its effects. So if you decided not to believe in karma, you're in gravity. If you're going to jump out of a plane, you better have a parachute, right? And it's the same with karma. You don't have to believe in it, but whether you believe in it or not, you experience its effects. So negative karma or negative actions happen because of clinging. And that's where the evil thing comes out. Evil in the Buddhist terms, greed, hatred, and delusion. So if our actions are based on that, then there's a tendency to cling. And the effect of negative karma on consciousness is that it continues to want to cling. So just like the heat from a candle flame clings to the fuel that comes along and then takes form as another flame, the heat from past unskillful actions, bad karma, so to speak, will cling to the fuel it encounters and take a new form. And so the shape of the past actions will determine what shape the new form takes. So I'm going to look at kind of how you stop fueling the fires of existence in the next talk. And we'll look at nirvana, which is unbinding, and the pure land, and some things in between. But I want to go ahead and leave you tonight, or this morning, if you're watching this in the morning, with this. When I was in Thailand with Tun Chao Kun, the abbot of Wat Florida Dhammaram, we traveled around various places, and we stopped at a temple in southern Thailand that he had visited as a child. A lot of people in that part of Thailand go to that particular temple, as he explained, because it had a crematorium. So there were a lot of funerals that happened there. Well, sure enough, when we got there, there was a woman's body lying in the coffin awaiting cremation. So in Thailand, funerals last for several days. And the deceased family and friends come to the temple every day, and monks chant, and there's a Dharma talk. And then the friends and family have dinner together afterward. And after about a week of this, the body is cremated. And so Tun Chao Kun was explaining all of this. And our group, I was traveling with a group of people who were exploring Thailand with him. And we were sitting outside with a few people from the temple. And so there were these insects droning in the background and stuff like that. And we sort of got into this impromptu talk on the subject of impermanence and the not self characteristic. And Tan Chao Kun said, well, one day you'll lay down and stop breathing. One day you'll go up there, pointing at this crematory. And people come to these funerals, he said, and they realize one day they'll lie in the flames too. And he said, you watch that and you think, well, where is me? After cremation, me is all gone. Everything goes back to nature. So one of the people in our group, a thoughtful young woman, asked what is probably the ultimate question about death. If that's the case, if anything I identify as me is gone at death, then what's the meaning of life? Why are we here? And Tun Chao Kun said, well, life is what you do. If you don't do anything, you don't have life. The best thing you could do is develop your mind. While you're still living, you need to learn what to do and how to live. So the meaning of life is to know the truth. So he looked over at this coffin that was lying there was an outdoor altar and a coffin there, and family members gathered around it. And the altar was draped in colored lights, which was kind of interesting. And there was a photograph of this elderly woman who had passed away sitting on top of the coffin. And Tun Chao Kun said, the person you love never dies. What dies is the body. That's just a compounded thing that ends. But the good things they've done, that never dies. So anyway, I hope that this has given you a bit of a framework for understanding kind of where we're going from here. Um, besides meditation being helpful for relieving stress and lowering your blood pressure and all that kind of stuff, this is a practice that transcends this particular existence. So we'll talk to you a little bit more about that next time, probably from White Sands Buddhist Center next Sunday. In the meantime, I hope you have a good day, and I will talk to you again soon.